Today we're going to talk about variables in PHP and in context of WordPress. So what is variables? Well, first of all, they provide you with a flexible way to dynamically access and or create variables in properties. Properties would be if you're dealing with a class. So what are they? Basically, PHP takes the assignment of a variable and then uses that assignment as the name of the variable that you want to access and or dynamically create. Does that make any sense? Probably not. So let's take a look at an example. And as we go through, it's going to make a little bit more sense to you. All right, so here is a variable, and you can see I've got it as variable underscore name, and I'm just assigning an arbitrary name to this called post underscore ID. The very next line is, you see that I have two $signs, and then that variable underscore name again. That's a variable when it's in that syntax, and you see that I'm making an assignment to that of 10. All right. The easiest way to explain what is happening is to just show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go and echo this out as what does the $sign variable underscore name, what does that actually dump out to the screen for you? So what assignment is it? And then the next line will show you that post ID gets dynamically created. All right, so let's take a look at that. When I go here and I run this index page, you can see that the $sign variable underscore name has a value of 10, and so does post ID. It also has a value of 10. Now let's go back and take a look at the code. And looking at the code, you can see that nowhere in here did I make a declaration of $sign post ID. Right? Here are my declarations up here, right here. All that I did was I made an assignment to a variable. That variable is $sign variable underscore name. And then by using the syntax of adding another $sign in front of that particular variable, then making an assignment of 10 to it, I was able to dynamically create the variable post ID. Another way to do this too, and you may see this as you look through documentation, is to then use the curly braces. And some folks like to do this. It does make it very clear as to what the assignment is, so that as you're looking through your code, you don't look at it and go, wait a minute, did I just make a boo-boo by putting a $sign in there? It makes sure that you intentionally know that the variables is what you're intending to do here. All right, so let's look at that definition again to see if we understand. PHP takes the assignment of a variable. This is the assignment. I'm assigning post ID to a variable. That variable is $sign variable underscore name. Then it takes that variable, okay, and it uses it to be the variable name of the next variable that is going to be dynamically assigned. And that's what we've done here. All right, you're probably wondering, okay, well, why in the heck would I ever want to do that? We're going to show you some real-world examples as to why you'd want to do that. And you'll see it a lot when you get into object-oriented programming, but I also like to use it when I'm processing from forms as well as Ajax. It just gives you a nice handy way to be able to do $sign underscore post without having to go through and do verbose programming of being able to go through the whole list of all the different variables that may be within that post. Let's take a look at another example. I'm going to get rid of that one. So I'm going to pull up just a form here. This form isn't doing really that much, but basically we're going to have it come back to the PHP. Here's the PHP for it. We're just going to collect a name, an email, and then submit it. Okay. Then if we look at the PHP and what's going to process it when it brings it back, I'm going to first go out and dump out what's in the post. Then I'm going to loop through each of the posts. I'm going to take the input, its value. I'm going to store it into, here's my assignment. Look at that. I took that input, which is a key that's in the post, right? And I'm using the variable variables. And if we want to make that more clear as to what's here, I'll put the curly braces around it. And now I'm dynamically creating and making an assignment of the value to the names that are within this form. So here's a name, your email. I know, not very original, but it'll do for our demo here. So I'm going to be dynamically creating the variables your name, your email coming off of this form, which gets posted back to the PHP. And then I'm going to just dump those out so that we can take a look to see that, yes, I am being able to access and dump out the variables your name, your email. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, my name, I'm Tanya, my email, and I'll submit that out. And you can see this is what's in $_post. So it comes back as an array, as they always do. You can see here's the key, which is the name of the input on the form, your name, your email, and there's the values. And look, here I was able to dynamically access and create those particular variables. Again, I use this a lot when I'm working with Ajax and when I'm working with forms. It allows me a very quick way to be able to go through and check that everything that I want in there coming back from, let's say, Ajax is actually there with the data, as well as I can then spit out a message to let Ajax know that, oh, nope, I didn't receive the correct parameter back from you, and or it's not in the right format. It really cuts down on the lines of code versus having to be very verbose about it. All right, let's take a look at one more here before we move into the actual code from WordPress. We're going to look at Form 2. This one would be dealing with, and we all do this on sites where we allow for some sort of filter. So if you've got a long list of posts, let's say, and you want to provide them with a way to be able to filter that information, maybe they want to look at posts that are by, let's say if we're in the school itself, I would have PHP, HTML, CSS, JS. There'll also be a lot of Genesis in there because we do a lot with the Genesis framework. And those of you who are listening who are Genesis fans, just hold on. There's going to be a lot of information for those as well. But anyway, we would select, let's say, a lesson number, and then we would want to filter that information. It would go back via Ajax possibly, or you may just post back and then spit back out that information in HTML by that filter, right? You're going to go and run another query. Okay, so why would this give us something interesting here? Well, let's take a look. Now, I've just hard-coded this in. I'm not hitting the database to go and get information, but let's just say I have these silly little titles for posts. I have just 2 per category. Here's PHP, HTML, CSS, and JS. So, again, silly little title names, PHP, lesson 1 and 2, and so on down the line. By filtering, wouldn't it be nice to just be able to quickly assign that, yep, I want this lesson number in this category, and pull out the one that I want to see. To do it without using variables, you can see it's kind of verbose. I would have a switch. There's other ways to do it. You can do it with an if, else if, and so on down the pike. but let's just do it this way. I have a switch. What is in that post filter by could be PHP, HTML, CSS, or JS, and then I also have a default in there in case you didn't pick anything. And then using the lesson number as a key within that particular array. Let's look at the first one, which would be PHP. So for lesson number, let's come back to this. If I picked 0, which would be lesson 1, remember arrays are always indexed at 0 index. So the first one is 0, the second one is 1. So if I want lesson 1, it would be a 0 in here. 0 would be PHP lesson 1. Right? So, and then it would echo out that particular title, right? If we scoot down here now, let's take a look at the way variables would do it. Matter of fact, before I show you that and we go through the code, let's just see what it looks like on the screen. Maybe that'll help. And then we can take a look at that. Okay, I'm going to pick lesson 1, how original, and I'm going to pick PHP since we were just talking about that, and submit that form. The verbose way comes up and tells me PHP lesson 1 was selected, right? We just went through that. The variables way, this is what the syntax would look like. The filter by, which right now is in that select and has all those cases, right? We are taking that, we're putting it inside the curly braces, then we're using that $, so we're saying that this is my variable right here, and that would be what? Think about it a minute. I selected the filter to be PHP, so therefore the value that gets assigned to PHP or to post filter by is PHP, right? Now replace that in here with the curly braces. And now you'll see that what you have is $PHP. That is what variables does. Does that make sense? Then I'm using the same syntax of within that array right here, I am going and pulling in the index of 0, right? Because I selected lesson 1. And lesson 1 had a value of 0. Good. So if I went back to this again, let me just make this a little bit more clear. This may help you out. Please excuse me as I type, as I'm talking. That would equate to that. Maybe it looks a little more clear to you if we do it on the screen before we look at the code, eh? Wow, silly me. Okay, the beauty of live working with this. Let's just skip it and we'll come back down here to get rid of it. All right, so if we look at we looked at the verbose way. Now let's look at the variable way here within the code. So all I did here was just spit out just some text that gave us this part right here, right? Just gave me this. And then here is what the actual assignment came back as when I echoed it out. So let's take a look. This is the actual PHP. As I said, the way you want to think about this is what is the value that is within the first variable. The first variable post filter by has a value of PHP in this particular case. Replace that into the curly braces. Now that becomes your new variable of $PHP. Within that particular array, just like we did right here with the verbose way, we're using that as a key for post lesson number, which is 0, and then we're spitting that out, and that would be a value of PHP lesson number 1. Okay. Now, You're going to wonder because in the first examples that I gave you, I did not put curly braces around the variable part, right? Why can't I do that here? The reason is I am then accessing an array. So if the curly braces say I want this to be the variable name, so you're dynamically going to be creating this variable name within what is within those curly braces. Without the curly braces, as I have here, if I just remove them completely, it would say the variable name is composed of the whole post pointer, which is PHP, pointing to what's within that particular array, which would be PHP lesson number 1. And you notice lesson number 1 is actual text string. There's spaces in there. That's not a variable name, right? So what we end up getting is null on the screen. So let's take a look. And here's what gets produced is null. That's why if you're going to use these until you become very comfortable with them, it's probably a good idea to always put curly braces around the part that you want to be the assignment of what the variable name is going to be. So you are explicitly saying this is my declaration for that variable. I hope that makes sense. All right, let's move into, close this out. Bye-bye. And we'll close this out. And we're going to move into some actual code. Okay, now this code is a little tough because it deals with PHP OOP. And if you're not familiar with object-oriented programming, fret not at this point. Just kind of get the concepts we're going through here of how variables work. In later courses, I'm going to be walking you through exactly what object-oriented programming is and how to apply it in WordPress, not only within a plugin, but also within themes themselves. But at this point, if you don't understand what the object portions of this are, don't worry about it, because that's not the point of this particular video. However, I'm going to expand this out so you can see this is my plugin. And by the way, this code is available on GitHub. And the link for that is within the show notes. So if you want to grab that up and take a look at the code, I think that is an excellent idea so that you can get very familiar with what's going on here. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example of using variables within, in this particular case, it's going to be within an object. So I'm going to show you how to do it with getting methods. There also will be one for a variable function, which I'll show you that at the very end. That'll be in the last lesson here that we go through. Let's take a look at our class. This is just a meta class. So let's say we have a post and we have some meta for that particular post. Okay. In this case, I have a post ID, what's my meta key, what are my defaults, and this is the assignment, whether it's a single or it's an array coming back from the meta. In this case, it's going to be an array. I have a subtitle, an access, and a TLDR, which I use those on the site just as a very quick explanation of what a post or a lesson video is about. I'm just going to real quick just tell you there's some notes in here that typically you would not be this verbose with a class structure for meta. Instead, this would not be here because you would not want to come up with a class for each and every type of meta that you have. Instead, you would want it to be very generic so that it's modular, and then you'd configure it up with an array and store the particular meta in something like protected data or meta, and then access it that way. But here I want to just make the point, so I'm actually calling it out. The way this is going to work is I'm going to pass an array in to configure it, and I'm doing this purposely to start you thinking about, how to make your code very modular. And modular basically means that you're able to take a piece of code and use it on every single project without having to rekey up specific implementations. Instead, what you're going to do is configure it through a configuration array, which you're passing into the class. And now this class is able to be turned into multiple different objects, depending upon what you need. Okay, so I'm going to pass that in. I'm going to go and initialize each of the properties. So I'm going to go through the config. And basically what I'm going to do is in the config, it's going to have a property as the key, and then there'll be a value. If that property exists within this particular class, you can see here is my variable variables. Yeah, I'm saying this, which is the instance of this particular object. And I'm taking that property and I'm saying that that is my variable variable. And I'm going to then make that assignment of value to that particular variable. So if I went up here and I said my post ID, let's say I'm passing that in. Let's say I'm passing in my meta key, actually, because that's going to be within the configuration array. So here's my configuration array. Here's my meta key. There's my defaults and is single. And what was on that class? Meta key, defaults, is single. So by those, I'm able to dynamically go in and make those assignments, right? So I'm accessing, in this case, I'm not dynamically creating, I'm accessing by using variable variables. And then I'm also assigning the post ID here. The next thing that I do is when I instantiate this particular object is I then go and pull the metadata for that particular post out of the database and store it. So here I do a get post meta, sorry. And you know that this is an array because I told you that in the beginning. So therefore it's going to be keyed up. If you've ever seen in the meta for a post, it will be indexed off of 0, and then there's an array of what those values are. So I'm just going to shift that over so I don't have to deal with that 0. I'm then going to go through the defaults. If we go back through, here are my defaults, right? And I'm setting that to just an empty string. I'm setting the access to public. Oh, I had one more, which was video link. Well, we'll leave that as it is. And I'm going to say if, I'm going to go through each of those and make that assignment. And if it's within the post meta itself, I'll store it. If it's not, I'll store the default value, and that default value came from the config, right? Now I'm able to go through and get the actual meta. So I've got this instance of it stored, and it's like cached now. So now I have this stored on this object, and I'm able to now go and pull out each piece of meta that I may want to display. In this case, I think we're just going to pull out the subtitle and look at it. So I'll come in and I'll say, give me the subtitle. If that property exists, it spits it out. Otherwise, it gives me a default value. Let's go and take a look at how that works. So on init, we'll jump down here to lesson 1. And I'm going to pull in the configuration. That configuration is meta.php. That's stored in my configuration folder, and that's what we were looking at here, right? So now I've saved that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm now going to instantiate the meta class. So here's the meta class, and I'm passing in the configuration that I just grabbed. And the post ID is 1 because we're just going to deal with hello world. And that gives me the instance of the object, which is meta. I'm going to var dump out meta, and then we're going to go and get that particular meta key out of that object of underscore subtitle. Okay, you're going to go, okay, well, what's the value of subtitle since you didn't show me that? If we come back over here to when I actually create, or when I activated this plugin, I just went in and stored just some silly I didn't create the whole meta box, so I just put in a subtitle here, my awesome subtitle. There's the access of public, my TLDR, I just put in a short description and a video link. Nothing too great, right? But at least it gave us some data that we can take a look at. So I am going to pull this over, so hold please. I pull it off my other screen. This is what it looks like before I do anything with it. Yeah? Okay, hold on. I don't remember if I actually, yep, I did. Okay. So let's run this code. There we go. So I ran it off init. So as soon as this starts loading, then boom, it's going to kick out and var dump out everything that was from this meta object. So you can see I have the post ID. Here's the meta key. Here are the defaults that got passed in, right? This is actually what is pulled out of the database for this particular meta that I was pulling off of this post. Here's my awesome subtitle. Isn't that a great subtitle? Public, the TLDR, and the video link. And if you notice, that's set to public. And did you remember that I did not dynamically, or I'm sorry, I did not declare that up here as my properties. You don't see that anywhere, do you? Interesting. So it actually went, when we did get meta function, or sorry, method, it actually dynamically created that for us. And when you dynamically create a variable, it sets it to public. So I just gave you one more little tidbit that you can use. All right, so then I'm actually, if we come back over here real quick, I want to actually go and get just the subtitle. So I would kick that out probably within the filter and put that right underneath the title itself. And so you can see here I was able to just pull the subtitle out, and there it is. That's one example of how I would do this. And you'll see that in some of my code as we start progressing along, or if you take a look at the code that is actually up on GitHub that is running right now on the club itself. I've put both the core plugin up there and the child theme is up there as well. Now let's take a look at lesson 2. Lesson 2, what I'm going to do is something that will create an object based upon, not by me saying meta itself, but by what is defined in the configuration. So let's take a look at that objects array that comes out of configuration. This is the class name. So I will be making the assignment and instantiating this particular object by this key of class name. This tells me what the configuration file is so that I'm not hard coding that into my code itself. Instead, I'm configuring it in a configuration array. That's a preferred way of doing your programming. You want to make as few hard code assignments as possible within your code. That makes it much more modular and portable amongst other projects that you're doing. It also makes it so much easier to manage. Should you need to make a change, you just go to one place, which is in your configuration arrays, or maybe you want to use JSON instead of an array, and you make your changes there versus hunting for it within your code. Okay, so basically I'm going to pull in that configuration of objects. I'm going to loop through those. There's only one in there, one object. And I'm going to loop through them. I'm going to pull in the configuration, which last time I did it by making it very clear and hard coding it in. Then I'm pulling it in from configuration meta.php. Here I'm pulling it in through that assignment within that configuration array. So here's configuration and there's that assignment, right? So I'm doing the same thing. Now I have the configuration for meta. But here's what I'm going to do. Look at this. Instead of saying meta there, I'm doing it from the class name. I'm still passing in the configuration. I'm still passing in the post ID of 1. So the rest of this is exactly the same. It's just how I'm doing this particular assignment here. Instead of up here, if we scroll back up to line 102, you'll see I set it as new meta, and I called out what class that is. Here I did it dynamically by pulling it from the configuration. It's just another way of doing it, and this would be a variable. It's not really a variable function, but it's another way of doing a variable there. And actually it is a variable function because it's doing an assignment. You can see the parentheses and what's being executed. So that will spit out the exact same information. Let me see. Boom. Not going to show you anything different because I didn't do anything different, right? I still just dumped out the meta, and I still just went and got the subtitle. Let's see, what if I did something different? We'll say I want to get the TLDR instead of subtitle. There it is right there. This is a short description describing the lesson. Okay, so I hope that it just inspires you to start thinking about other ways that you can do this. And as you're looking at code that I do later on down the pike, you can refer back to this particular lesson to start seeing what you could be doing within your code, make it less verbose, find ways to be able to turn your code into very modular code and using assignments through configuration arrays.